All right, everyone, welcome back for another episode of the Impactful Innovators series. Very excited today to be able to introduce Chris Wysopal. Chris was able to once testify before Congress, as he'll say, that he could bring down the internet and manage to do so without getting arrested. So he's been at a very interesting area of security and enterprise security for quite an illustrious career. Again, thank you, Chris, for taking the time to join us today.
So when I was at RPI, actually, I ran a bulletin board system in Colony Apartments on my campus phone. And a bulletin board system was just a PC with a modem where people could dial up and exchange information. And that's kind of how I learned about the existence of the hacker community and people sharing technical research, which was, sort of the forbidden research. They had to reverse engineer it rather than, learn it from the manufacturer, because the manufacturer kept that data secret because that was part of their security model, was don't let the manuals fall into anyone's hands. And so that started with sort of the mindset of, reverse engineering systems, whether it's hardware, wireless systems, software systems. Reverse engineering those systems was a fundamental thing that I sort of learned really early on was really important to understand the security of systems. And so this kind of really started off in the very beginning of my education, was self-taught, trying to find technical documentation written by reverse engineers as opposed to the manufacturers. And over my career, I've really learned that, just trying to hide how a system really works is a fool's errand as far as trying to secure it. So we call it security by obscurity. But learning all this was pretty fundamental to building my career in cybersecurity. And it really wasn't just the curriculum at RPI, it was sort of the environment of exploration, computer systems and networks on campus, being able to explore and taking advantage of that. So ultimately, as I said, I went down the software path. My first job was with a company called Lotus Development, which is one of the first successful independent software companies. So there weren't many independent software companies. It didn't really exist until the PC revolution. So they didn't really come into existence until like the mid to late 80s when the PC started to get traction. And Lotus was one of the very first independent software companies making spreadsheet software. And they made word processing software and other business, applications. And my first job there was actually writing software to test the software. I was a quality engineer. And again, that was also something that really helped me down my career of cybersecurity, because you'll see later on, writing software to break software is what I ultimately ended up doing. And when I say break it, not just find a functional bug in software, actually find vulnerabilities that you could exploit. As I said, after I got out of RPI and then working at Lotus, I ran into a bunch of people that you would call hackers in the Boston area through different bulletin board systems. And here's a picture of me and my colleagues from my hacker group called The Loft. In 1998, we were actually asked to testify by Senator Thompson, who was the chairman of the Committee on Governmental Affairs, to testify at the very first hearing on computer security that the Senate had. And it was due to, all of a sudden, all of the government was starting to get hooked up to the internet in the late 90s, and this was becoming a big risk. And the Senate wanted to understand, not just from the Government Accounting Office, which was doing the testing of internal government networks, or the FBI, which had a criminal approach. They wanted to hear from hackers. They wanted to hear from people who were actually out there finding systems that were vulnerable, figuring out how to break into those systems. And it was quite an event, I have to tell you, to have, the 7 of us there. We look a little bit out of place. I think some of us had to borrow suits. It was really kind of the first formal thing a lot of us had done. And I was actually the oldest there. I was 33 years old at the time, but the youngest, Joe Grand, was there. I think he was around 20, 21 years old. So it was a pretty young group. And it might be hard to see, but our hacker names are actually on the placards in front of us. If I advance the slide here, you'll see that's me there with longer hair. And you can maybe make out my hacker name, Wells Pond, on the placard in front of it. The thing I like to talk about with this event was, how did we get here? How did seven guys who, not in their day jobs, but sort of on the side, I was a software engineer as my day job, on the side doing exploration, how did we end up, at a Senate hearing? And what I like to say, especially when I talk to other, cybersecurity people, I like to say we made trouble, right? We exposed things that people didn't want exposed. We put people at risk that people thought it was a bad thing to put them at risk. And when at the time we called it just like getting our message out there, making trouble for people so people would listen to us. And now as an entrepreneur, I realized what we were doing is we were being disruptive. We were being disruptive to the status quo. And whenever you're disruptive to the status quo, you get a lot of attention. And that's good for hiring employees. It's good for marketing. It's good for getting customers to know who you are. And so the way we made trouble is we were, quite frankly, in some what people would call gray areas. We were finding vulnerabilities in products like Microsoft Windows and Internet Explorer, and we were just publishing those vulnerabilities with working exploit code and saying, look how crappy the software that Microsoft is building. Look how bad the software IBM is building. It's putting your enterprise at risk. It's putting your personal data at risk. Here, let us show you how it happens. And this was kind of uncharted territories. Obviously, the companies didn't like it. The government was kind of watching us. Like, are these guys doing this to break into their computers? And the thing was, we weren't. And the media got it kind of confused. When we published an exploit in Microsoft Windows, the media would often publish a group of hackers called the Loft from Boston breaks into Microsoft, right? And we say, no, we're not breaking into Microsoft. That's clearly illegal activity. What we're doing is we're showing other people how to break into Microsoft. They say, wait a minute, is that ethical? And so, but what it really did was it shined a light that software vendors were shipping products that had vulnerabilities in them that we could find, and we would say, hey, if we can find it, we're not the engineers on the team, we don't have access to the source code. If we can find it, you can find it. And if you could find it, you could fix it before you ship the software. So it really shined a light on the whole area of what I call security quality, but you could just take any engineering discipline. The idea that you would ship a product without doing negative testing, safety testing, things like that on a product just seems wrong from an engineering perspective. And we were shining a light that was going on in the industry, and we really disrupted the security industry by doing this. This just going back to the way the security industry was before we did this, it was very government focused. People would look at documentation that the Department of Defense would put out on how to build software, how to build encryption systems, how to build a secure system. And really all it was design. It was how to design the software. It had nothing to do with implementation, right? So if there were bugs in your software, which we all know there's lots of bugs, especially if you don't test properly, that could be exploited, then your software could be compromised by an attacker. And that concept was something that didn't exist. People just said, I'm going to design the software well. And yeah, there might be bugs in the software, but what we're going to do is we're just going to keep the bugs secret. What we'll do is we'll set up CERT, the Computer Emergency Response Team it was actually government funded at Carnegie Mellon. And what they'll do is whenever they hear about a bug, they'll find out about the bug from, people out there, and they'll keep it quiet, and then the manufacturer will fix the bug. And so there was this element of we're just going to keep these things secret, and that way everything will be secure. And basically we were disrupting this whole model. We were publishing our information. We weren't giving it to CERT. They say, why aren't you giving it to CERT? And we would say, well, CERT's going to just give it to the manufacturer. The manufacturer is going to silently fix something. They might put it out in their next major release, and people might be vulnerable for months or years. And so we disrupted this whole model of secrecy, which doesn't exist anymore. But really, the other real part of this was this was a paper that was written in '93. Dan Farmer worked for Sun Microsystems, and Wysopal, I believe, worked for IBM Watson Lab at the time. And they were some of the people that were actually doing some deep thinking about changing the way security was done. And they came up with this idea, the way to secure an enterprise network is to try to break into that network, figure out the way you broke in, and then patch that hole or reconfigure it or block that path in. And that was a new way of thinking. And that was coming around just as we were doing our research at the Loft and trying to understand, how could we take those ideas forward? The other thing that was a gray area, which we got a lot of heat from, was not just us, but other hackers at the time, was coming up with hacking tools that you could run to break into somebody else's system. So an example is a program called Crack, which targets passwords. It tries to brute force password and use different guessing algorithms. I ended up writing a piece of software called LoftCrack, which became a very popular password cracker. We sold it. We sold it to the government. We sold it to banks. We sold it to enterprises, because the idea of you try to crack your own passwords before the attacker can started to take off in the 90s, and this is how we were changing people's mindset. One of the most interesting disruptions was this piece of software called Satan, which was written by Dan Farmer and Wysopal, who wrote that paper, Breaking Into Your Network. What they did was they automated the processes that they talked about doing manually in the paper. In essence, became the first network vulnerability scanner, which is now a multi-billion-dollar industry. A hacker wrote the very first commercial network vulnerability scanner. A man named Chris Klaus from Georgia Tech wrote this in the late 90s. He sold this company, Internet Security Systems, for over $1 billion to IBM. But it's a huge industry now. The three biggest companies, Qualys, Tenable, and Rapid7, are probably together worth over $5 billion market cap. So it's a huge industry. The really interesting thing is Dan Farmer was fired from his job at Sun Microsystems for releasing this software. So he came up with the first piece of software that is now a $5 billion industry, but because the mindset hadn't been disrupted yet, people thought he was a bad guy and he was just doing it to harm people, where he was releasing it so that people who had the mindset of you break into your own systems in order to secure them. And one of the guys at the Loft wrote this software called Netcat, which allowed you to connect different inputs and outputs of different network sockets. And that's all it did, was it connected network sockets. But antivirus companies banned it. You couldn't run it on your system without antivirus flagging it. It was just the mentality of just these powerful tools, which by themselves really didn't break into anything. It's not a worm or a virus. Started to be shut down by the old part of the industry, and thankfully, eventually, we won. Also, just the information out there. Instead of the secrecy of CERT, hackers started to publish mailing lists of vulnerability information and have DEF CON to talk about how they broke into systems. And then the government started signing up for these mailing lists and coming to these conferences, because they started to realize, hey, we need to learn from the hackers too. So it was really interesting being part of this sort of huge disruption of the way cybersecurity was done. And, here's the Internet Security Systems logo. That's the Loftcrack logo. So, in the late 90s, this is when the idea like hackers are starting to write software that they could build businesses around. And this started to get our minds going, like, we could turn what we do into a business. And so we were getting all this publicity. Here was, they had a special edition of EE Times back when, trade publications used to be made out of paper. And they did a special issue on us and how the whole idea of reverse engineering and tearing apart pieces of software and hardware was really the new way people had to think about securing things. So we called that, improve the security of your product by breaking into it. So if a network administrator, an enterprise security person is going to help secure their enterprise network by scanning it and probing it and red teaming it and breaking into it, our attitude was, well, the people developing software and hardware need to have a security engineering team that does that on their products before they release them. And that was the mindset that we were trying to shift. So we wanted to start a company. We got to this point. We spoke at the Senate. We're in the EE Times. We've gotten good press. We've successfully been seen as the good guys and the bad guys. Been seen as the good guys, not the bad guys. But the problem was, essentially we were all technologists. And we struggled with what's the business model for this. Like, we just didn't want to be consultants. We wanted to build software, but we didn't have any business experience running a software company. None of us had really gone up the ranks in management at software companies. We were all going up the technical path. So we just really didn't know how to take it to the next level, and we kind of struggled with this. And when I look back, and this was around like 99, I look back on this and I say, like, if I had just, met someone who knew more about business, I had a friend who was an MBA who I talked about this over beer, and they said, hey, yeah, let's start a company. Somehow that didn't happen. But the next best thing happened. We got introduced to people who were starting a company that were business people that were looking for more technical help. And it was a company called At Stake that was founded in 2000. And this is how Newsweek talked about us, using good hackers to battle bad hackers. But we essentially became the hardcore, security expertise at this new consulting company, At Stake. So we sort of did the next best thing. We were early employees. So we weren't founders, but we were early employees. We had some, early company stock, and we got to be there at day one. So it was a great learning experience. So it was sort of the next best thing to starting your own company. And we just kept taking things further when we were there. We said we just didn't want to be like a normal consultancy, like an Ernst & Young or a tech consultancy. We wanted to invent what a security consultancy should be. So we did our own vulnerability research. We built our own attack tools for consultants to use. Our whole mentality was, we'll help you secure your software by breaking in. And we had a couple competitors spring up who liked the idea that we had. One was called Garden. They were acquired by VeriSign. Foundstone was acquired by McAfee. One thing I learned was, if you have competition, that means you're onto something, right? Someone else wants to replicate what you're doing. And, I thought, we were onto something. And we really changed the industry when Microsoft went looking for help. In 2002, Microsoft realized that they had not built their software securely, and the Department of Defense and many banks were saying, we're not going to run Windows as a server, or Microsoft server software like databases and web servers and things like that. It's fine for a client, that's not as at risk. But for a server, we're not going to do this unless you guys clean up your act. So Bill Gates realized that he had to turn this battleship around, that he was going to have to change the way Microsoft built software. And this is 2002. Microsoft had a very successful run up until 2002 here, but they dropped everything. They said, we're going to train our engineers and we're now going to build secure software. We're going to all learn how to build secure software. The problem was they had no idea how to do it. They really had no idea how to do it, so they had to hire consultants to do it. So they hired us at Stake to do this, and these are just some of the things that we had been doing that we taught Microsoft how to do, to threat model their software, how different exploits worked, how to do something called fuzzing, which is really pseudo-random negative testing, network testing, file testing. And they took all this knowledge, and we were there for a couple of years teaching all these teams how to do it. And Microsoft actually turned around and said, okay, well, we're going to publish this as the Microsoft SDLC, and we're going to make this an ISO standard on how to build secure software. So we're really kind of changing how people do things now. I guess we were successful there, but we weren't really making a huge amount of money. We were, at the end of the day, a consulting firm, and consulting firms don't really have high multiples, right? So our stock isn't getting to be worth much. You usually get like a 2x multiple on your revenue stream for a consulting company if you're good, 1.5x if you're not so good. So we kind of changed things. I talk about the new era of security really started in 2003 after AtStake was able to work with big clients like Microsoft and eBay and kind of change the way the industry did things. But, you know, the company wasn't overall that successful. But one of the cool things that we did was we incubated some technology called binary static analysis, which was a way to automate the reverse engineering of software. And that automated reverse engineering of software, we determined that was a great way of essentially being able to do an expert code review on that software, how a security expert would actually look at code and be able to determine where the bugs were that were vulnerabilities. We could do this in an automated way at scale on binaries. And so we incubated this project, and this was actually a lot of the people on this team were from the law because we were the hardcore, security experts and engineers at this consulting company. And we spent about a year to 2 years building an MVP, actually getting it to a couple customers, Fidelity and AT&T, and they liked it. And we were like, this is going to be good. We can actually start selling software as a company and start to get out of this consulting model, which doesn't really scale very well, right? It just scales with people. And we wanted to get into the software business. We thought this was a great idea. Well, our investors, it was a VC-backed consulting firm, which you very rarely see because you can never get the VC multiples that they want, the 5 to 10x return on their investment. You just can't get that at a consulting company. And after about 4.5 years of existence, the VC said, you know, we just want our money back so we can invest it somewhere else. So we got sold, the company got sold to Symantec. Really didn't make any money because it just got sold essentially for what the VCs put into the company. So even though we were early employees with some stock, it wasn't where you wanted to be. We got sold to Symantec, an antivirus company, which was like the old way of doing things, right? We're like, these guys don't know, they have the old model. The security world has moved on, and we're moving on, and it just was not a good fit. So a lot of the consultants left, and here we are with this cool new technology, and they just want to end of life it. They're like, no, we don't see this as something that we could ever sell at Symantec, so we're going to end of life it. And this is where you make some lemonade out of the lemons. And we had the idea, me and my co-founder of my company, Veracode, had the idea, well, if Symantec isn't going to use the technology, why don't we find some investors, raise some money, and then buy the technology out of Symantec and build a company around it? They're just not going to do anything with it. We think this has huge promise. So this is like something which I try to talk to people where, Another way you can start a company, I know a lot of people, what they do is they learn something at a company and then they leave the company and then they go and do that. But what if you've been working there on software for a while and the company shuts it down or you think it has value? Don't forget that you can buy that typically for whatever the depreciated book value is. They're going to lay you off and they're going to try to depreciate the value of that. To them, making some money off it is a good idea. That's why companies spin out assets that don't fit their business model, don't fit their strategy, because they can make more money on it that way than just getting the tax write-off. So we were able to find some VCs, and this is where we really got our business know-how. Was the VCs had hooked us up with a woman who was an ex-CEO of one of our competitor companies, Gardent, and she was intrigued because she knew At Stake had all these talented people and were working on all these cool things. And she had sold her company, and so we had someone who has had CEO experience and really kind of helped us build a business model around this technology we built. That's how we got started. And essentially, we started Veracode. My co-founder, Christian Ryu, he was a computer science major, graduated from MIT. I met him. He was part of the Loft. He was part of my hacker group. And the two of us went through the motions of getting this VC money, getting introduced to people through the VC that could help us on the business side. And ultimately, we raised $4.5 million, which $1 million of that went to buy the software and patents that we had filed from Symantec so that we could be an independent company. And they really helped us with the SaaS model. We spent many months, working out of the VC's offices, trying to figure out, what's the business model around software that can find vulnerabilities, right? Do you want to sell it to attackers? Do you want to sell it to Russia and the NSA so that they can find vulnerabilities and hack software? We decided that wasn't the kind of business we wanted to be in. A lot of people are in that business. People are in offensive cybersecurity. We wanted to be on the defensive side because we saw that there's a bigger market on the defensive side. We had been making over $1 million a year consulting for Microsoft at Stake, and we knew there would be a good market for using our software defensively. So our idea was to sell it to people who were writing software, whether that was a software company like Microsoft or eBay, or it was a bank that was building their online banking web applications, and that was actually kind of new back in 2006, but that has exploded and been huge for Veracode because we don't just sell our software to software companies, we sell our software to almost every single enterprise vertical, because every enterprise vertical today, it communicates with their customers through their web applications, through their mobile applications. They communicate with their partners through APIs. And so the amount of software written has exploded, so there's more and more software that needs to be secured. And that's how Veracode was really able to grow really well. So between 2006 and 2017, over those 11 years, we grew to a valuation of $640 million, and we were bought by CA Technologies, which is an old software company started in mainframe, but they had been diversifying to enterprise software, and they made a lot of software for enterprises building software, and this fit into their portfolio quite well. So it was a good exit, and we were quite happy I was quite happy to exit and have a liquidity event in 2017. And my plan was, they were going to give me some golden handcuffs to stay on at CA. And my plan was, hey, in 2 years I'll start another company. Maybe I'll go work at another startup that someone is starting. I'm not sure, but probably not going to stay at CA the rest of my career. But then another interesting thing happened. You think a spin out is interesting once. I was involved in a second spin out because CA was bought by Broadcom. which is a company that's huge, makes almost all the wireless chips that are in your laptops and mobile phones, well, as almost all the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi chips that are out there. But since they're an OEM company, no one's really heard of them. And they bought CA to diversify into software. And here we were, a business unit within CA, and we said, "What are you gonna do with us? You know, we're a cyber company. We're still growing. There's a huge opportunity here." And we convinced them that it'd probably be better for this asset to be spun out rather than try to build onto something that wasn't super profitable. Because the idea of Broadcom buying CA was essentially to wring out a lot of the profit and shut down all the things that were not profitable yet. And we weren't really profitable yet. And so we convinced the CEO and the CFO at Broadcom to put us on the market and see how much they could get for us. And a private equity company, Thoma Bravo, came along and offered $1 billion. I'm sorry, $950 million. So we weren't quite a unicorn. For Veracode. So we're newly independent again, and able to chart our own destiny, able to disrupt, hopefully keep disrupting the cybersecurity market. And you know, the plan is to just keep growing this company to be worth, you know, $3 billion plus over the next 2 or 3 years. And I think we're halfway there already, where we've been spun out about a year and 3 quarters now. So I think I've had quite an interesting journey just with Veracode alone, to start the company as a spin out, be with the company for 11 years, go to work at a big old enterprise software company for a couple of years, and then get spun out again. So I've learned along the way, I think it's important for technologists to really understand business, because you'll be better in your job, but you'll also be gearing yourself up to potentially start a company if you get that entrepreneurial itch. And essentially the itch came to me because I thought this technology was really cool, and this technology could impact the world and make software secure. So doing good in the world, make it easier for people to have secure software running in their enterprise, on their mobile devices. And the idea that something that could be good was just going to get shut down, that's what really forced me to say, I'm going to figure this out. Like, I'm going to figure out how to rescue this technology, and the only way it's going to be rescued is if I and my co-founder, we start a company and we build on top of it. I guess I just want to talk about one final more lesson before I maybe open it up for some questions, is choosing the SaaS model was like super important. And today, I think a lot of companies would choose the SaaS model for this type of software. But back in 2006, it was kind of a leap of faith that the word SaaS hadn't even been coined by NIST yet. It was just called on-demand software. Salesforce was very well known for on-demand software, and they were one of the, innovators there. And this was something that the business people at our VC at the time, they were called Atlas Ventures, they said, the only way we're investing in companies is if they're either SaaS companies or they're cybersecurity. Those are the two things we're investing in. And if you guys were both, I can guarantee you our partners would want to invest in that, because that's like you got both of our investment strategies happening at the same time. And we didn't really understand the benefit of SaaS at the time, but we said, you know what, it's a differentiator. it would differentiate us from other people that were trying to secure software with tools, on-premise tools that were deployed, with developers or with security experts. And that differentiation, we think we can build upon, because you need differentiation as a company. You can't just do exactly what other people are doing. Competition's good, but you want some differentiation. And this was that differentiation that we really needed to stand out, and has really enabled us to be a leader in our space. So why don't I end it there and just open it up for questions.
All right. Well, that was a really interesting journey. Great story. Tomas, do you want to kick things off with first question?
What was your reaction when you were asked to testify at the hearing?
We had a lot of trepidation. And that's because, we didn't want to go up there and be sort of hung out to dry, right? They, sort of the hostile, you can testify at the Senate and sort of they can be hostile, or they can be truly asking you for your advice. And you see, Zuckerberg and these other leaders go up there, and they're pretty hostile. They're not like, how can we solve these problems? They're like, your company is screwing up, right? So we were worried about that. We were also worried about our day jobs, right? We were worried that we would be associated with, what if we were wrong? What if this wasn't the way that we were going to tip cybersecurity in that direction? What if this was not accepted and people would get fired over this? So we were also afraid of getting fired. And that is one of the reasons we only accepted to do it, is if they used our hacker names and didn't use our real names when addressing us in the minutes on those placards. It was still kind of naive because there was all these photographers there, and obviously people we worked with saw pictures of us in the paper. That just using our hacker names did not solve that problem. But yeah, we were worried, but we went for it. We just said, this is a tremendous opportunity to educate and, try to change the world. And so we took the risk.
Adi, do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to ask, what does your hacker name actually mean? Is there significance to it?
Yeah, there's really not much of a significance to it. I know some people have names that have some, and some just are silly. I was just kind of looking at different bulletin boards and logging in, and these different bulletin boards, when you logged in, it said you have to create a unique name, and it can't be your real name. No one uses real names here. And I was like, what do you mean you don't use your real name? You have to use an online handle. And I was just sort of in a rush. I'm like, I just want to log in. Let me just pick a name really quickly. And I actually pointed at a map that was on my wall of the Boston area. And there's a Weld Pond in Dedham, Massachusetts, and somehow my finger went on Weld Pond, and that's how I got sort of that silly name.
Yeah, did your hacking group ever get in trouble with the law or anything?
No, and that was like one of the rules was don't do anything illegal with other people from the Loft or on the Loft network. And that was kind of the rule, which basically, kept us on the straight and narrow. It wasn't that we didn't know people who were breaking the law, but we didn't do it ourselves. We thought that the risk was too high. We were just too high profile, and plus that's not what we were interested in. Even if that was sort of the benign breaking of the law, where you don't really harm anything, you just are exploring. We didn't even do that because we were worried we were just kind of too high profile.
Which market has the highest demand for your software?
Not so much in emerging markets. One of the sort of things that happens with cybersecurity, especially when it's securing hardware or software, is new companies need to gain traction, and building in security and spending money on security can slow them down. So we all know about technical debt, where you keep building up all this technical debt, and then you get, an enterprise looks to buy you, and they go, whoa, wait a minute, we're buying this thing that's full of technical debt. The same thing happens with security is a lot of emerging companies like an IoT or companies doing new kinds of software, they ignore cybersecurity. So it's typically not a good market. It's only when things start to have value that people care about securing them. So once you get a big brand name out there, you start to get attacked, and then people start to worry about you. So almost every company that's doing something new that I know of goes through this cycle of building up security debt, and then they get attacked, and then they sort of get religion, and they realize, oh, I can't just keep going on like this anymore. So if you look at something like Snapchat, Snapchat didn't do anything for security for their first 5 years, and then they got broken into horribly. Same thing happened with Twitter. Same thing has happened with a lot of IoT companies. So we usually wait till things get a little bit more mature before we would start to market to them.
Chris, we're running out of time, so I'll ask one last question. If you were a freshman back at Rensselaer today, do you think it would be security that would get you really excited, or what do you think would ignite your entrepreneurial passions?
So I still think security is a really, really interesting field. I don't see it going away anytime soon. Because we keep inventing new technology and new technology models, and then we have to figure out how to secure them. So it's a really interesting field because you're constantly learning about new technology. Like when I started Veracode, the iPhone did not exist. The idea of a mobile app did not exist. And so when enterprises like banks started writing their own mobile apps, they said, oh, I want to secure this, right? I don't want my customers' money to be stolen through the mobile app. So you got to help me secure this. So we had to take our software and we had to learn the mobile threat model, the mobile operating systems, the way you could attack a mobile app, which is completely different from a web app. And so I had to learn, and our company had to learn, what is mobile security, right? And so the latest thing we're dealing with is the cloud. Enterprises are all building everything in the cloud. It's not like a lamp stack anymore with a database and a Linux server. It's APIs running on containers in AWS. So we have to learn how to secure that. And then, IoT is a new thing that you have to learn, and the whole model of cloud to IoT or peer-to-peer IoT. So to me, it's a really interesting field because you're always learning, it's always changing, it's always dynamic. And, I really do feel you do good for society by securing things because, hospitals can do great things when they have software and hardware that works really well, as opposed to taking advantage of the latest and greatest technology. You don't want a hospital to get broken into, right? So I think that you do good for society too on helping on the cybersecurity front.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for taking the time to join us today. Let's give Chris a round of applause, at least virtually, if you unmute your mic. Don't go away, everyone. So we're going to have tonight, just to remind you, our last Change the World Challenge pop-up. Kelly, do you want to introduce it?
Yes, we'll be meeting again at 6 o'clock tonight. We're going to give you tips on how to win the competition and how to be able to get your pitch done within 5 minutes.
Great. Remember, this opportunity to enter this is still there. You just need to attend one of these sessions and get a little bit of tips of how to pitch your idea. So thanks, everyone. Thanks, Chris. Hope you have a great rest of your week. We'll see you next week with Guha Bala. Guha is one of the founders of Vicarious Visions and then Valen Studios, one of the really anchors of the gaming industry that has now had a significant presence in the Troy and Albany region. And so we're really lucky to be able to chat with Guha. They also just launched their first product from Valen Studios, which was the new Mario Kart game. So really significant franchise within the Nintendo legacy that they were able to kind of take on, produce in Troy, integrate both a hardware solution with a software solution. And I think we'll get to hear a little bit of that story next week. So thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time.